In this podcast, two Gen Xers are taking a trip down memory lane, revisiting and reflecting on the cinema of the 1980s. We'll look at the hits and the flops, the studio blockbusters and art house indies, the critically acclaimed, and the universally reviled. The series is hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli, a writer and librarian, and features Dustin Morrow, a filmmaker, author, and professor of film. So pull on your legwarmers, crank up your boombox, and hop in the DeLorean. It's time for the Long Rewind. Welcome to the Long Rewind. I'm your host, Lisa. With me, as always, is Dustin.
Hello.
And today we're going to talk about TV movies in the 1980s, or made-for-TV movies in the 1980s. So yeah, do you want to say anything about TV movies in the 1980s?
No.
Okay, well, I guess that's it. Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, so the kind of like peak of the TV movie era was the 1970s. There were a lot of prestigious TV movies from that era, and a lot of like filmmakers who kind of got their start working in that that venue. Like famously, Steven Spielberg, who made Duel. In the late 70s, John Carpenter made Elvis with Kurt Russell in the lead role.
Oh, wow.
He also did a really cool kind of Rear Window remake called Somebody's Watching Me with his wife, Adrienne Barbeau, former wife. And it was a great era for horror in TV movies. Bad Ronald in 74. Don't Be Afraid of the Dark in 73. The Salem's Lot, the Stephen King adaptation in 79 was a huge hit. It was a two-parter, I think. And Trilogy of Terror, which is probably the most famous horror-based TV movie from that era, with the famous segment where this little kind of native doll comes to life and it stalks this woman, Karen Black, through her apartment. Very, very famous kind of short film within a longer film. But there were still TV movies in the 80s, and they were on every single week. And it wasn't really till the 90s that TV movies got less frequent. And then, by the 2000s, they are essentially dead.
Well, and I think we should explain, too, like what a TV movie meant in the 70s and 80s, because it's different. There are still sort of TV movies now, but they're relegated to, they're on Lifetime, they're on the Hallmark Channel, they're on TV and they're movies, but they're very specific, on very specific channels. You don't see them on the networks anymore. Whereas, as you were saying, like weekly at least, I think you would see a made-for-TV movie on, ABC, NBC, CBS.
They were like regularly scheduled programs, essentially. Yeah. They had names like the ABC Friday night movie or the Sunday night movie on CBS. I mean, they have their intros. It
was a time slot.
Famous. Like their intros will spark nostalgic reactions
100%,
in Gen X-ers.
Yeah, definitely. Even if you didn't watch them, like there were a lot of TV movies I didn't see because I was a little too young for them, but there's something about the introductions to, the graphic and the song that went along with it that would stir up a little excitement in you and a little nostalgia. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I should specify that when we're talking about TV movies in this episode, we are really talking about movies made for the three major networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS.
Right. We're not talking about cable, HBO, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And we're also not talking about, we're not talking about, HBO was making TV movies from its inception almost. And a lot of movie actors would show up in those, but they were less common in the network TV movies, which tended to star TV actors or actors kind of on the way up in their career or maybe on the way down. But this was, the 80s were definitely an era where there was a divide between television and film that you don't see today. That you didn't see a lot of movie actors showing up in TV shows or in TV movies during the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, that might be a hard thing to imagine now for some folks who didn't experience it.
Yeah,
because
it's constantly major movie stars are in TV shows now.
Yeah, or what you might consider a TV show or a series, right? A series like what am I thinking
like
of?
An HBO series.
True Detective, or things like that. So they weren't considered prestige back then.
Yeah. So I thought we would just talk about some of the more prominent TV movies and maybe make recommendations.
Sure.
And if you're thinking, why would they recommend TV movies from the 80s to me? Like, how the hell am I supposed to watch these things? I will say that you can find, like, surprisingly, you can find the majority of these on YouTube now. It seems like there's just like this incredible wealth of 80s TV movies that have been uploaded to YouTube.
I think
the
you can
other
even
source you could find them at is the Internet Archive.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people have uploaded copies, old VHS copies of these TV movies, which frankly is the best way to see them because it's kind of like what it was like to watch terrestrial television in the 1980s, where occasionally the weather would be bad and the channel would not be coming in great, and you're forced to watch commercials. And in a lot of these uploads, people leave the commercials in, and you can watch the 80s commercials. And
that's what I remember about the experience of watching these things when I did see them. They felt like an event to me, and there was something about the commercials that made it almost seem like, it was longer because there were commercials, and so it seemed like this big event that you're sitting down to watch this big movie. So you would get that experience if you watched it with the commercials. And sometimes I think you can find these on DVD, although they won't have the wacky old commercials. But yeah.
Oh yeah, a lot of these are on DVD.
Yeah.
A lot of them are put out by these sort of more niche release labels.
Yeah.
But you can find some of them for sure, especially some of the genre ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first thing I ever worked on while I was still an undergrad studying film at the University of Iowa, was a TV movie.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, it was
this was like a 90s thing, probably.
It was 90s.
Yeah.
It was one of those Hallmark movies.
Yeah.
Hallmark had this run of prestige TV movies in the 90s, like Christie with Kelly Martin. And Sarah Plain and Tall with Glenn Close.
I mean, that's probably the most prestige one I can think of because of Glenn Close being in it.
Yeah. She was a movie star.
It won
at the
awards.
time.
I mean, it was a pretty big deal. Yeah.
The one I worked on was called Harvest of Fire. And it was Patty Duke played an Amish woman. And Lolita Davidovich, I don't know if you remember her.
Sure, yeah.
She played an FBI agent who was investigating a series of arsons. Like somebody was burning the barns of the Amish, and it was suspected that it was a hate crime. And so the FBI was called in, and she and Patty Duke kind of team up and to solve the arson spree.
That actually sounds like something I would enjoy now. A couple of ladies solving a mystery, sort of a gentle mystery.
Yep. That's basically what it was.
Yeah. I remember seeing Christie and really, I mean, these aren't 80s. I know these are 90s, but I remember seeing and enjoying Christie at the time. That was very much up my alley. And I think I may have seen Sarah Plain and Tall too. That was based on a book, I think. But yeah, I wonder if is that the inception of the Hallmark craze? I'm not really sure because now Hallmark movies are
it definitely
enormous.
Predated them having their own channel.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure that
those were all on network,
but
I think.
suspect strongly that the inception of that channel came out of
the popularity
of
these
those movies, because those movies were huge hits in addition to winning tons of Emmys.
I think Christie even became a series, if I recall correctly, like a actual series later. So we're just gonna.
This is going to be not that every episode of our show isn't slightly peculiar and largely based on our tastes, but
sure.
This will largely be like our memories of TV movies. So a lot of these, like, you probably have some that you remember that we won't mention. Maybe as we name some titles, if you're a Gen X-er, you might be like, oh God, yeah, that. I haven't thought about that in forever. Or perhaps we might compel you to hunt some of these down on
YouTube,
as I said,
or whatever.
YouTube or Internet Archive or on DVD to give them a watch, because some of these movies are really quite fantastic. And
yeah, definitely. That's one of the things I think is so fun about discussing 80s TV movies is that you probably saw some at the time that you've completely forgotten about, and then all of a sudden all the memories will come rushing back the minute you're like, oh my God, I did see that. Or you didn't remember the name of it, and there it is. So it's a really fun thing about talking about these, I think.
So I kind of broke these down into some categories. So why don't we just take these sort of one at a time?
Okay.
Let's start with holiday movies.
Oh, yes,
because I know that Lisa's favorite TV movie is a holiday TV movie.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I have some others too, but yeah, a lot of them were, a lot of the TV movies that I loved were probably holiday ones. I think you're referring to Babes in Toyland.
I am. Babes in Toyland, starring Drew Barrymore and Keanu Reeves.
Before Keanu was really famous. I guess Drew had a reputation at this point.
Yeah.
But Drew is like, what? I don't know, 12, 13, 14 in this movie. She's pretty young.
I had not seen this until last year. This one somehow completely missed me, but was big in your household.
It was big in my household.
You and your brother.
Because we taped it off a TV and we would watch it over and over again, regardless of whether it was Christmas or not. Of course, it had the commercials involved. There were all these like craft, here's how you make Velveeta dip commercials, like holiday recipes. Which actually I also have a lot of affection for the commercials too. But yeah, we watched it a bunch. Pat Morita's in it too, and Eileen Brennan and Richard. Why can't I think of his last name?
And it's based on an old Judy Garland, or was that based on something prior?
No, I don't think it's Judy Garland, but it is based on I think March of the Wooden Soldiers, which I think is Abbott and Costello, or Laurel. It might be Laurel and Hardy. I get them mixed up sometimes. But there's a much older version of this kind of thing from a long time ago. But I'm sure it doesn't bear any resemblance to it, other than the fact that a lot of nursery rhyme characters are involved. So anyway, it starts off with in modern day, 80s, and Drew Barrymore is a sort of a girl on the cusp of teenagehood. She's not quite a child, not quite a adult.
Give me the elevator pitch. I could see this turning into a scene by scene breakdown of Babes in Toyland, which I think might drive some people to leap off a bridge.
Well, maybe you should give the elevator pitch then. What do you think the elevator pitch for Babes in Toyland is?
A girl who really loves the city of Cincinnati falls out of a truck and rolls down a snowy hill and bonks her head and wakes up in a weird land with majestic creatures, including Pat Morita, and has musical adventures and comes back to Cincinnati.
Yeah, I guess that's basically it.
And really, really likes Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of got a Wizard of Oz vibe in the sense that the people who are in her real life are also in this fairy tale world, which is all nursery rhyme characters. And
this is the rare TV movie they did on the How Did This Get Made podcast.
Yeah, so you could hear all about it there.
Anything about how wacky
it's real wacky. It's real wacky. Yeah.
So my favorite holiday TV movie was called The Night They Saved Christmas.
Yeah.
It's Jacqueline Smith, who's plays a woman whose husband is working for an oil drilling company at the North Pole, and they're looking for oil, and the drilling they're doing upsets Santa's workshop and puts Christmas in jeopardy. Santa's played by Art Carney.
Sort of an issue
and
movie.
So she and her 3 kids are kidnapped to Santa's workshop and convinced that Santa is real, and then they have to try to save Santa's workshop before the drilling destroys it. And it's a terrible movie, and I thoroughly loved it and watched it a million times as a kid.
You still watch it, I believe.
Do. It's great.
Yeah. I see another one on this list that I also love that was also big at our house was The Christmas Toy. I
don't remember this one.
It's a Jim Henson one. This one you can find streaming. I'm pretty sure it's out there. And it's all, there's no Muppets in it, but it is all puppets. And it's kind of the Toy Story story, frankly. It's about a toy who expects to be, he's already been a toy that this little boy or little girl, I think a little girl owns, and he expects to be the big star at Christmas, but he's already been the Christmas toy, and there's going to be a new Christmas toy, and so he's grappling with that, and there's a lot of great songs in it. I love that movie, and it's another one we taped off a TV and watched a lot, so it's a good one. It's actually legitimately good.
Yeah, there were a bunch of these Jim Henson holiday movies. I'm struggling to remember any others off the top of my head, but yeah.
Well, I can remember other Jim Henson movies that were not Christmas related. There was a whole, I think they had a series. I forget what it was, like The Storyteller.
Mm-hmm. I thought that was a TV show.
Well, it was, but it had that kind of, they were one-offs, right? It wasn't, they felt more like movies, but it was this sort of Jim Henson specials is what they felt like.
Christmas Carol was a big holiday TV movie with George C. Scott,
right?
Which they kind of spoofed at the beginning of Scrooge, where they had Buddy Hackett playing Scrooge. The Worst Witch was another one. That's the one I kind of remember the title better than I remember the movie itself.
Was that supposed to be?
Bulk was the little girl in that, maybe?
Oh, yes. I think we tried to watch this recently. Was that, so that was like Halloween, I'm guessing,
Yeah,
right?
It's a Halloween movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. There were a lot of kids' TV movies.
Yes.
I really loved the Ewok movies, especially the first one. There was the Ewok Adventure, and then there was Ewoks: The Battle for Endor.
It's astonishing to remember that there were two.
The second one starred Wilford Brimley.
Which is the one?
Mr. Quaker Oats.
I mean, there's the one with like the little girl with the blonde curly hair and the little boy. Oh, she was? Oh, so then I don't know what I'm talking about.
The one with the boy was in, that was the first one.
Okay,
that's
maybe
the one
that's
I
the one I
loved,
remember
where the
better.
parents got kidnapped by this big monster,
Yeah.
and Wicket helps the two kids save their parents.
And you get the sense it was shot like in George Lucas's vast backyard or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, was it? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well,
yeah, it was shot in
it does seem
Northern
like it.
California.
Yeah.
It was. This is also hard to imagine, but as kids in the 80s, like we were starved for Star Wars content. Hence the Star Wars holiday special.
That's from the 70s, right?
We would take that was from the 70s.
Yeah.
But I'm just illustrating the point that like we would take anything we could get.
Oh,
it
yeah.
wasn't an era where there was like a new Star Wars series every 6 months.
Nope.
And all these movies. We had 3 movies and that was it. And so
of course you couldn't watch these over and over again unless you managed to videotape them. They weren't just like on Disney Plus for you. Which I think maybe is the Ewok Adventure on Disney Plus? I think it might be. I think you can actually go watch it.
Yeah.
If you want to.
Yeah. It doesn't hold up. I will say. But as a kid, I really loved it. And in fact,
it is very sweet.
A lot of these movies that I'm mentioning are movies that I taped and watched over and over
Absolutely.
again.
That was one of the ways we would experience them. Was
another one I remember is Quarterback Princess. Do you remember this one?
No, I don't.
It's Helen
remember
Hunt,
this.
who was in a lot of TV movies as a tween and a teen.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And she played a girl who wanted to play quarterback for the boys' team at her high school, and was able to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moving from kid movies to how about teen movies? There was this whole strange kind of almost like a subgenre within TV movies of these teen TV movies where they would take all of the top teen stars from the various sitcoms and load them into one TV movie.
Yeah.
So for example, the one that I watched a lot because I had a big crush on Alyssa Milano when I was a kid was Crash Course, which is set in Driver's Ed, which is Jack A. Harry and the guy from Night Court are the teachers. And it's like Tina Yothers from Family Ties, Rob Stone from Mr. Belvedere, and all these, it's just every kind of teen actor from that era. And of course, Alyssa.
Yes.
And oh God, B.D. Wong.
Yes.
Who does a rap at the end.
He does a rap.
And that's something you should see. I wouldn't blame you for not wanting to watch Crash Course, but I will blame you for not wanting to go on YouTube and just look up the rap from the end of Crash Course, which is wild.
It really is.
Yeah. Another one I remember was Dance Till Dawn, because that also had Alyssa in it. And it was set in a prom.
Yep.
I can't remember who else was in it.
I believe Christina Applegate is in it, and I believe,
that's
right. Oh my gosh, why can't I think of his name? Chandler from Friends.
Matthew Perry.
Matthew Perry is in it, I believe. Went back when he was Matthew L. Perry. I'm pretty sure he's in it too. I was a big fan of Dance Till Dawn.
Yeah.
It introduced the word puce and color puce to me because somebody was going to have like a puce prom dress, I think. In fact, I think Vanessa from Cosby Show was also maybe in it.
Tempest Bledsoe.
Yeah, Tempest Bledsoe.
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
I feel like these, I don't know this for sure, but it does sure seem like these were sort of promotional almost.
Oh
in a way.
They were. It was like this. It was like it would be like all the actors from your network.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the like teen actors who were in the sitcoms that were on your network were in this thing. Yeah, it was totally promotional. And then the ads in TV Guide, which were like the only way you could learn about these TV movies, really. You could see commercials.
Yeah, they might have
Or you could see these big full page ads in the TV Guide. Mm-hmm. And really, like that's, to some degree, that's why these TV movies feel less special in some ways or disposable because it wasn't like you were reading about them in Premiere Magazine or Entertainment Weekly or seeing a lot about them on Entertainment Tonight, or you certainly weren't seeing trailers for them or, a lot of commercials. And so they were just sort of like, they did feel a little more disposable.
Well, and you
time.
didn't have to go somewhere to watch them, right?
Yeah.
You were just in your house, which is something you can't even think about now because they're all in your house now.
Yeah. But they did still feel like events.
Yes.
Because in the 80s, as we know, unless you had a VCR and were setting it to tape the thing when it was on, you had to be there when it was on. And so if you saw Dance Till Dawn was going to be on Friday night at 8:00 and you wanted to see it, you needed to be home.
You'd
in
make
front
an
of the
appointment.
TV at Friday night at 8:00.
Yeah.
So they did feel it wasn't the same thing as going to the movies, but it did feel like a thing. Like
they felt special to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it felt like an event, and they often, my memory of them, I could be wrong. I feel like a lot of times they'd run on a Sunday night or something, which also felt sort of special, that you would be getting this movie on Sunday night. I don't know.
Yeah.
That might not be true of all of them, but
yeah, there was a Friday night one, there was a Saturday night one, I think there was a Sunday
they tended
night
to be
one.
a weekend thing.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure, I mean, now I'm thinking about, these are not quite the same, but the mini-series, there were so many big mini-series then too, which would run all week, but yeah.
So the teen ones, there were a couple of great ones with Michael J. Fox very early in his career, like in the Family Ties. One was called Poison Ivy, which was a Meatballs ripoff.
Okay.
Where he and Nancy McKeon were camp counselors. And then there was one called High School USA, which was kind of an American Graffiti ripoff with, I think it was also he and Nancy McKeon.
Oh, really?
I think so. But yeah, he was in a few of those. There was a Halloween one called The Midnight Hour.
Was he in that?
No. That was like Sherry Belafonte Harper and LeVar Burton.
Oh.
And like all these monsters came to life on Halloween night, and they had the teens had to fend them off.
Wow.
There was one I loved called Combat High, which they then released on DVD later as Combat Academy. Because it had in a small part, in a supporting part, George Clooney.
Right.
So when they re-released it later with like George Clooney's name over the title, although he's not in it that much, it's actually Keith Gordon from Dressed to Kill and Christine is the lead. It's a total Police Academy ripoff. It's about kids like sent to military academy. Yeah.
I mean, these are things, this is one thing that you would see occasionally is somebody that becomes super famous later.
For sure.
In a TV movie, and you're like,
and then what I was going to ask you about, because I think I showed this to you. Do you remember Secret Witness?
No.
It's a mystery thriller, murder mystery with Leaf Phoenix. AKA Joaquin Phoenix and Kelly Martin.
It's totally coming back to me now. I know what you're talking about. I just didn't remember the title.
David Rash from Sledgehammer is the dad who they suspect of murder. And Kelly Martin's like this oversexed tween that gets Leaf Phoenix into trouble as they're investigating this murder.
Leaf, did you say he's now Joaquin Phoenix?
Yeah.
He used to be Leaf
he
back
used to be
then.
Called Leaf, Leaf Phoenix.
Yeah, I do remember this now. I think he was there visiting.
Yeah, it's like set in
it's
like a New England seaside town
like a seaside town. It has it's not Rear Window, but it's got that kind of.
It's just one of those movies that I remember because the 80s were, as we've mentioned in other episodes of the show, like big on these kind of adult-ish thrillers or action movies where kids are at the center,
right?
Like Cloak and Dagger,
right?
Or Monster Squad, or any number of movies that you probably wouldn't see now that kind of have a hard edge, but where the heroes are kids,
sort of kids in peril, but kids
it was
saving the day.
It was definitely in that vein.
Yeah, it was. I remember that. Now, you did show that to me. It was actually rather fun. It was a good time. That makes me think of, do we want to talk about Disney Sunday night movies?
Yeah,
yet?
I mean, that's its own also subgenre. So the Disney Sunday night movie was, it was technically, I guess, a series, but it was a movie every Sunday night. It aired opposite 60 Minutes, which was the number one show on television in that era. So it started where I grew up in the Midwest, it started at 6 p.m. It was on 6 to 8. And sometimes they were movies, Disney movies that had shown in theaters, like the kid-oriented movies. So they would have some big-name movies every once in a while. But most of the time, they were made-for-TV, kid-targeted movies. So some of the bigger titles from that era were Mr. Boogedy, Splash 2. They did it's kind of straight to TV sequel to Splash,
Yeah.
with neither Tom Hanks nor Daryl Hannah in attendance.
Or John Candy, for that matter.
They did a Parent Trap 2 and a Parent Trap 3. They did The Return of the Shaggy Dog, which was a sequel to a 70s movie. They did a sequel to Anne of Green Gables, which Lisa loves.
I love the miniseries Anne of Green Gables. I don't actually know the sequel. It never.
They did a couple of movies by Gene Shepard, who wrote A Christmas Story and narrated Christmas Story. So movies about the same characters. And then they just had some titles that, like, if you Google these, you'll find a lot of websites with Gen Xers going, "Oh my God, I haven't thought about this movie in forever." My Mother, the Rock Star.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
I think Diane Cannon.
Yes, Diane Cannon was the rock star mother, I believe. Yeah.
The Brat Patrol, which is about a bunch of kids it's kind of a Goonies ripoff set on a military base with a bunch of military brats.
I mean, it's even got
Sean Astin.
I was going to say it even has Sean Astin in it. Yeah.
Not Quite Human, which had Alan Thicke inventing a robot teenage son who he then sends to high school, and he gets in all kinds of trouble. Starred Jay Underwood from
That's right.
The Boy Who Could Fly, and Uncle Buck. He played the boyfriend in Uncle Buck that John Candy tortures. Double Switch, which is my favorite Disney Sunday night movie and one of my favorite TV movies ever.
Yeah, it's so
George
fun.
Newbern and Elizabeth Shue.
Yeah.
It's about a
kind of a Prince and the Pauper.
kind of a high school kid and a rock star who look exactly alike, and they switch places to experience each other's lives and have adventures and learn lessons.
Of course,
and it's delightful.
Wackiness ensues. Yeah.
I-Man was one I loved with little Joey Kramer from Flight of the Navigator. Scott Bakula plays a guy who is exposed to toxic waste and becomes invincible.
Oh, I didn't know this one.
And so they turn him into kind of a government agent. There were a bunch of them. 14 Going on 30, Earthstar Voyager, Ask Max with Jeff Cohen from the Goonies. I think all the Goonies did Disney Sunday night movies.
Okay.
But yeah, it was appointment viewing for me as a kid. I used to watch it almost every week.
Yeah, I watched as many as I could. Yeah, they were great. They were very exciting.
A lot of TV movies were backdoor pilots. So they were intended to be pilot movies. A lot of TV shows, hour-long TV shows in that era began as 2-hour episodes. And when they decided not to make it a show, they would, this was very common in the summer when they weren't generating a lot of new content. The TV networks would air these pilots as TV movies.
Yeah, like a waste not, want not situation. They would use them anyway.
Yeah. And this trend continued well into the 90s. There were some notorious TV movie pilots. But there were a couple of sci-fi ones I loved. There was some great sci-fi television in the 80s. There was one called Condor, which was kind of a cop that gets partnered with a robot cop. It was ridiculous.
Yay, I love it.
And North Star with Greg Evigan, where he plays an astronaut who is exposed to some kind of solar flare, and it gives him superpowers when he exposes his eyes directly to the sun.
Oh.
So he wears these protective sunglasses, and when he needs superpowers, he takes them off, and he looks at the sun, and his eyes start glowing, and then he can run super fast, and he has super strength. But it almost kills him every time he does it.
Right, I see.
Yeah, good times.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of great genre stuff in the 80s. A lot of genre TV movies.
Yeah.
Amazons is one that I loved.
Yeah, I've seen this.
You've seen,
it's actually great. It's why can't I think of her name?
Stowe.
Madeline Stowe. So again, you see some of these people who go on to do bigger things. That one's really fun. Do you want to explain Amazons?
Yeah, she's a doctor in Washington D.C., and all these prominent male politicians start turning up dead, or they turn up to the hospital and they're not in that bad a shape, and then they end up dying mysteriously.
Right.
And she starts to put together this conspiracy that basically there are these women operating as this like kind of terrorist group within Washington, D.C., who are descended from the actual Amazons, like the Wonder Woman era Amazons. And it's just crazy. It's a crazy movie.
I feel like it's better than it sounds, but there were some wacky TV movie premises out there.
Mazes and Monsters, which is one that got a lot of attention later on because Tom Hanks plays the lead, but it's based on a book by Rona Jaffe. It was capitalizing on the controversy around Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, the sort of panic around.
Yeah, there was a period apparently in the early 80s where parents thought that playing Dungeons and Dragons was going to turn their kids insane.
Yeah.
And that's basically the premise of Mazes and Monsters.
Yeah.
Is that Tom Hanks gets so into the game of Dungeons and Dragons that he loses his mind and he actually thinks he's in the inside the game, and he goes out into like Times Square in the 80s
wrapped
and,
in a blanket or something.
Dudes.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
It's a wild movie. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
I think my favorite thriller from the 80s TV movies was a movie called Final Jeopardy.
Okay.
Which is a terrible generic title. Richard Thomas, who played John Boy on the Waltons, plays a guy who comes into Chicago with his wife because he's got a job interview, and they, through a series of mistakes, end up in the wrong part of the city after hours, and their car gets locked up in a parking lot, so they can't get access to it, and they're trying to, basically the whole movie is them trying to get out of this dangerous part of the city, and it's actually really good. It's really well shot. It's really scary. It's got some unbelievably great suspense sequences. It's got a great climax. The last 20 minutes is set on the L and is actually a pretty good action sequence. It's really frightening and freaked me out as a kid.
Yeah.
And I've watched it as an adult and found that it actually does hold up pretty well. It's a little cheesy like all TV movies from the 80s, but it's pretty solid.
Yeah. It sounds like another 80s fear movie in the sense that Mazes and Monsters was about fear of D&D. Final Jeopardy was sort of an urban fear.
Yeah,
preying
and
on
there's
that
a
kind of urban
genre
fear.
of those movies. Like there's one called Judgment Night, a feature film with Emilio Estevez and Cuba Gooding Jr. and Jeremy Piven, Stephen Dorff. It's got the exact same plot. They end up in the wrong part of town and they witness a crime and then they are on the run.
Right.
And that's basically what happens in this movie. But yeah, it's really well done. I won't ruin it for anybody that has the inclination to go dig it out, but it has a truly awesome sequence set in a phone booth that I would put up against any suspense sequence in any theatrical film from that decade. That's how good it is.
Wow.
Just a really masterfully done thriller sequence. Horror was a big genre. That was really big in the 70s and continued less so into the 80s, but there were some prominent and very good horror-based TV movies in the 80s, which I'm guessing you didn't see many of since you were not a horror film watcher, even probably TV movies.
No, definitely not. I'm thinking about it now, thinking back just the experience of all this stuff. If I would see commercials for this stuff, I would already be scared. And so there was a degree to which some TV movies seemed frighteningly inaccessible to me. Like, I'm not going near that. Like that's like it had a frisson of fear about it. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
So some of the more prominent ones, The Babysitter with William Shatner and Lindsay Wagner, I think, plays the young killer babysitter. It's exactly what you think it would be.
Okay.
Ingratiates herself with the kid and wants to take over the family.
It's like Ham That Rocks the Cradle, basically. Yeah,
exactly. There was a remake of The Bad Seed in 85 with kind of an interesting cast. David Carradine's in it, of all people. Hotline, which was Linda Carter coming off of her Wonder Woman fame, and she plays a DJ that's stalked by a killer.
Oh, wow.
I Saw What You Did with Shawnee Smith was a remake of an old William Castle, Joan Crawford movie about teen girls that make prank calls where they call somebody up and they just say, I know who you are and I saw what you did. And they accidentally call a serial killer right after he's killed somebody. And they just think they're making a joke. And of course he tracks them down, and it's Shawnee Smith and Candace Cameron plays her little sister.
Oh, wow.
Robert Carradine plays the psycho killer.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's kind of a hoot.
Wow.
Don't Go to Sleep was a really famous one that got really high ratings and was very successful at the time. It's about a family that is terrorized by the tween daughter who has passed away, and her ghost is coming after them. And one that I really liked that was, I think, underrated and probably still holds up, although I haven't seen it in a while, it was a serial killer thriller called In the Company of Darkness with... what's the guy's name on Wings? Stephen Bauer. Is that his name? The guy that's not Tim Daly?
Yeah. I think Steven's right. I'm not thinking of his last name either, but I know who
Anyway, he plays a pretty freaky serial killer, and Helen Hunt plays a police officer who goes undercover to try to record him confessing to the crimes, and starts dating him. And
Oops.
it has some scenes that are still burned in my brain like 30 years later that are really frightening. A scene in the bathroom in particular that's very, very scary. And then, of course, probably the most famous horror film from the TV movie landscape in the 80s, a movie that just absolutely haunted the hell out of me during my childhood, because I saw this thing when it premiered and I was way, way, way too young to see this movie. I was at my babysitter's and my babysitter was an older woman who had a teenage daughter who was a bit of a hellraiser, and she was watching it, and so I was just there.
Right.
And I saw it, and it was a movie called Dark Night of the Scarecrow.
Oh, yeah.
And holy hell, was that not a movie that a kid my age should have seen?
Or from your part of the world.
I was like 5 or something like that. I mean, and I grew up in the rural Western Illinois, surrounded by cornfield. There was a cornfield across the street from my house.
Yeah.
So the idea of a scarecrow that comes to life at night and kills people was not the right thing. And it just so happened that it's also a masterfully made movie. It's very Hitchcockian. It totally holds up to this day. I now own it. I think it's a great movie. I think it's one of the best horror films of the decade, even though it's a TV movie. Like, it's better than 99% of what you'll see in theaters. It's incredibly eerie and haunting, but also kind of beautiful, and kind of it has this great folk horror element to it. Have you watched this movie? Did I show this to you?
A long time ago. Yeah, we watched it together. I didn't see it when I obviously would not have gone anywhere near this at the time, but you and I did watch it many years ago. I don't remember it super well, but I know your love of it and your high regard for it, for sure.
Which is funny because as a kid, like, I used to steer clear. Like, I would like you, I would get the TV guide every week and kind of plot out, circle the things I wanted to watch and the movies I wanted to see, kind of plot out what I wanted to watch that week. And it would re-air from time to time. And I would be like, I would like hide in my room. I didn't even want to like accidentally see it while flipping through channels.
Right.
Like, that's how scared of that movie I was. It really scared me. So it's wild to me as an adult that I now like love it.
So like, what brought you back to it then? What made you say,
like,
I want to...
like anything, I'm sure I got a little, I can't remember when I rewatched it at what age I was, but at some age I was like, I've got to see what the hell it was that scared the crap out of me.
I see. So you were just like older and curious about...
Yeah, for sure. And it's sort of like, and there's no blood in it, and it's not like, it's not like watching like one of the Friday the 13th movies or anything.
Or Saw or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's nothing like that. It's,
right.
It's
all mood and
exactly.
tension.
But there are images in it that like are really burned into my brain forever. Like, just wild.
Well,
stuff.
again, I mean, it's set in a rural community, I think, right?
Yep.
So that would have hit home for you 100%. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
True crime was one of the biggest genres of 80s TV movies. Seems like every like serial killer, every kind of like wife beater. I mean, they all had a TV movie. some of the really famous ones were The Executioner's Song with Tommy Lee Jones and Rebecca De Mornay. That one, I think, won a bunch of Emmys. Death of a Centerfold, which was the Dorothy Stratton story. Jamie Lee Curtis played her.
Oh.
That was around the same time that they made a feature film called Star 80 with Eric Roberts that was in theaters. But this was the TV movie version. There was a thoroughly ridiculous one called Brotherhood of Justice with Kiefer Sutherland, Keanu Reeves, and a bunch of forgetting who else, but a bunch of name actors of that age from that time as a group of high school kids that decided to become a vigilante group called the Brotherhood of Justice, right? And clean up their school.
I see.
And of course, things start to go too far.
So wait, this must have been before either of them were really famous, though, right? They were probably on the younger side.
They were teens, late teens. It was probably for Keanu. It was probably like right before Bill and Ted. Yeah. Maybe right after.
Because I just can't imagine either of them having gone back to TV movies after some of what they ended up doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where it falls.
I'm just kidding. It doesn't really matter. I was just curious.
I'm kind of curious, though. I'm gonna look it up. It's, it was 86. So, yeah. Okay, yeah. So just before.
Right.
They kind of took off.
Yeah.
But like enough of a name that you might know who they were.
Sure.
To head up a TV movie.
Especially if you watched Babes in Toyland.
Yeah. And then also in the true crime category, maybe my favorite TV movie from the decade, or the movie I think is the best movie, there's a film called In Broad Daylight. Yeah. Which is based on a true crime book that won a bunch of awards. It's the true story of a man who was essentially a town bully and terrorized people in this small town in the Midwest, and went so far as to try to murder some people. And the town kept seeking help through legal means, and he kept escaping on like technicalities or just through delaying of
just the way law procedure works.
Getting cases delayed for years and years and years through having good lawyers. And finally the town got fed up and they gunned him down. Wow. And in broad daylight, as the title tells you, in the middle of the town square, and the whole town saw it. Yeah. And so everybody in this town knows who shot him and actually killed him, who fired the gun. And no one to this date has ever said. Wow. The whole town took it to their graves. Wow. And this was in, I want to say the late 70s maybe that this happened. So it was,
not a long time ago or anything.
No, there's still people alive that were there and saw it. And to this day, no one has ever, despite this getting worldwide media attention and having this best-selling book and having this movie made about it, nobody's ever broken and nobody's ever said who did it.
It kind of sounds like a modern day Western, but without the Clint Eastwood character, like that's the point at which a Clint Eastwood character would run into town. Then they'd be like, you have to help us. Yeah. But they did it themselves. Wow. That's wild.
The bully, the lead character, is played by Brian Dennehy. Oh. And he's so scary. I think it's one of the great villain performances of all time. Yeah. It's that good. It's just an amazing performance. Wow. And the film has this like eerie score. It's shot beautifully. It just does not play like a TV movie. It's so good. Yeah. Marcia Gay Harden plays his teenage wife. Whoa. Cloris Leachman plays the woman whose husband he tries to murder. Wow. Yeah. Gosh. Have you ever seen it?
No, you've spoken a lot about it. I know it's like pretty much the TV movie you think the highest of, but I haven't seen it.
It's great.
It sounds scary a little bit. I don't know.
It's freaky. It's on disturbing. YouTube for those of you that are so inclined. If you like a good true crime thriller or just a thriller, I highly recommend it. It's called In Broad Daylight. The other probably the biggest category besides true crime maybe was like the Issues.
Oh
movie.
Yeah. Oh yes, I remember these very well.
Thing in the 80s. So some of the more prominent ones were the Ryan White story. Yeah. Which I think was Lucas Haas.
Was it? I
Played
mean, I know
Ryan
it was
White.
about.
He didn't look anything like
Yeah.
Ryan White, but yeah. And Judith Light from
Oh,
Who's
did
the
she?
Boss was his mom, played his mom.
Yeah.
I remember watching it. Ryan White, of course, for those of you that don't know, was a young kid who contracted HIV in Kokomo, Indiana, and wanted to go to school, and was his school denied him that opportunity, and they took him to court.
It's another one of those situations where maybe we forget nowadays what a big deal HIV and AIDS was in the 1980s. He got it from a blood transfusion.
I think so.
Am I right? I don't remember exactly, but yeah. Yeah, I remember that being on. I didn't watch it. I remember the Issues movies also kind of scaring me a little bit. Like they would have these very intense commercials for the Issues movies, and I would be like, oh.
Do you remember seeing any?
I don't know that I actually watched any. I certainly remember the Ryan White story being on. I'm just looking at the list you have here. I don't think I saw any of these. Oh, well, no, I don't know. I know my first name is Steven here somewhere, which I remember being on, but I don't think I watched either.
Yeah, that was a mini series.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's a different.
It was but it was about a true story about a kid who was kidnapped and eventually that's what he said when he finally got away and years later went into a police station, and they asked him who he was. He said, I know my first name is Steven, but I don't know my last name.
Sorry, didn't mean to take us out of that.
No, it's all right. Other Issues movies, an early Frost, which was also about the AIDS virus, a family dealing with that. Something About Amelia, which was Ted Danson as a man who was molesting his daughter.
Oh, gosh.
So pretty brave performance by him. Because that was bleak. The Day After, which was a very, very, very famous movie about the nuclear bomb dropping in the United States. So it has an all-star cast led by Jason Robards, but there are just like tons and tons of famous people in it.
This is one I've definitely heard of, and I know it made
a bit
big
of a sprawling
splash.
epic. It's like over 2 hours long. And it still holds up. It's pretty disturbing. It's just about like what it would be like if a bomb was dropped on,
a nuclear bomb. Yeah.
In the United States, and what it would be like on the ground among the people that are actually suffering from it.
Was that very early 80s? Yeah. It's not something I remember hearing about until later in my life. But
yeah, it was very early. Bluffing It, which was Dennis Weaver as a man who couldn't read, a man who was illiterate.
Oh, yeah.
Had this amazing scene that I remember as a kid that totally freaked me out, where he witnesses a car crash, and so he runs to a phone booth to get help, and he calls 911, and they ask him, he's like, I just saw a car crash, I think somebody's hurt. And they ask him for the address, and he's like, I don't know. And they're like, well, do you see a street sign? He's like, yeah. And they're like, well, what does it say? And he's like, and he has to tell them, I can't read.
Oh, that's so heartbreaking. I remember, I don't know. I find myself very heartbroken sometimes by these illiteracy stories. I remember adult literacy being kind of a big thing in the 80s.
Yeah, for sure. It was one of Nancy Reagan's things, I think.
Yeah.
The Burning Bed was a huge movie.
I've heard of
got
this.
a ton of attention in the 80s. It was the movie that kind of legitimized Farrah Fawcett as an actor. People that thought she was just something of a blonde, a blonde from
Charlie's Angels
and, a pinup. But she's very good in it. She plays a abused wife who eventually sets her husband on fire and burns him alive as a way of escaping the abuse. Is based on a true story. Cry for Help, which is another movie about a woman who was abused by her husband, got away from him, and then got a restraining order, which he would not respect. And then he finally came and attacked her, and the police were there, and they watched it happen without intervening because they were too afraid of him.
Oh, my gosh.
And she sued the police, and won a huge settlement. Wow. Nancy McKean plays the lead character, Tracy Thurman. It's an amazing true story.
Gosh.
It also has one of the most disturbing scenes I've ever seen, which is the scene where he attacks her. It's really, really graphic.
Yeah, I don't think I could watch that.
Amazing that it was in a television movie. I can only imagine the censors let it go through because of how important the story was. That's the only reason I could ever believe that it was
They
allowed
would
on
let it through.
television.
Yeah.
I certainly shouldn't have seen it as a kid.
Yeah.
I'll remember it forever. Desperate Lies, which was about teen alcoholism, again with Helen Hunt. Helen Hunt was in a lot of stuff. The Stone Pillow, which was Daphne Zuniga plays a college student who befriends a homeless lady played by Lucille Ball in a dramatic performance. So that was the big hubbub around the Stone Pillow, was that it starred Lucy in a drama role. Please Don't Hit Me, Mom, which is about exactly what you think it's about.
I don't mean to laugh, but like, gee, I wonder what that's about.
A Bunny's Tale, which was based on Gloria Steinem going undercover at the Playboy Club. Kirstie Alley plays Gloria Steinem. God Bless the Child, which is a really great, heartbreaking movie where Mare Winningham plays a woman who is just living in abject poverty and just teetering on the edge of homelessness. And it's just a really sympathetic and beautiful and moving and sad film about what it's like to just be right on the cusp of homeless. And it's sort of the movie traces. She's a single mom. She's a little girl. She's like 5 years old. And it just traces their struggle to kind of have a roof over their head from night to night. And some nights they do and some nights they don't. It's rough.
I think all these movies were probably pretty earnest, and they probably are where the Lifetime movies maybe came from, which I don't know. Maybe they are also earnest. They seem maybe a little less so. Maybe
probably,
a little more
except that those movies quickly evolved into like the trashy.
Well, that's what I mean, right? That's what I mean.
Thing,
Whereas these,
right?
I think, were meant in earnest as sort of consciousness raisers. It did kind of evolve, I think, over the years.
Well, certainly that became like a, I don't know if it's an insult exactly, but that was a
it wasn't
a
praise.
perceived stigma of TV movies is they were overly earnest and overly cheesy and overly focused on like social issues, like the movies I just listed. I mean, we've listed a lot of movies in a lot of genres here in this episode, but those issues movies are probably, if you think of like, oh, this is like a TV movie. If somebody says like, I feel like I'm in a TV movie here, that's what they're talking about, right?
Yeah, I think they're talking about almost a certain aesthetic and production value. They weren't high budget for the most part, and they looked a certain way and had a certain feel for sure. Yeah.
And the last thing that I thought we might just want to mention was that there were a lot of multi-part movies.
Yeah, miniseries.
Of course, miniseries, as they were called.
I saw some of these.
They would be like 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 episodes, and they were massive events.
Oh, yeah, true events.
In the 70s, Roots was one of the highest rated programs of that decade. And
definitely. Really
launched a whole, universe of event series.
Yeah.
So I didn't watch most of these, but these ones I pulled here were the big names. I'm just going to go through some of them. North and South, which was the Civil War. It was Patrick Swayze.
Patrick Swayze was in that.
Yeah. The Blue and the Gray, also obviously.
I assume that was the Civil War. Didn't see it.
War and Remembrance. Believe it or not, they attempted a multi-part adaptation of War and Remembrance. The Winds of War. A lot of them were about war.
Yeah, very epic war kind of things.
But then there were also like a lot of these Danielle Steele soapy movies. So like Lace was one. I think Phoebe Cates was in that.
Oh.
Scruples, Hollywood Wives, Valley of the Dolls.
Yeah.
And then there were like these sort of epic romances. Shogun, based on the Mishner book. The Thornbirds was a big one.
That one was huge. Yeah.
Richard Chamberlain.
Yeah.
Played the lead in that one.
Yeah. Lonesome Dove.
Lonesome Dove, which was certainly one of the biggest miniseries of the 80s and of all time.
I mean, both the Thornbirds and Lonesome Dove were books. So that was a thing that would happen too. That was how some books were adapted, were into these big epic
Lonesome
miniseries.
Dove is the rare TV movie to kind of like transcend
that's supposed to be very, very good.
If you just Google like greatest Westerns of all time, you will find it at the top of many lists alongside like titles like Unforgiven and The Searchers, which is amazing.
I don't know if this is true, but I think some of these miniseries at least must have had higher budgets. A lot of them are period, but I don't know that for sure. Yeah, they generally looked
they were
pretty
big events,
decent.
so they definitely spent some cash on them.
Yeah.
Around the World in 80 Days with Pierce Brosnan as Phileas Fogg and Eric Idle as Passepartout. That was one I remember because I was like a freshman in high school, and I had a social studies teacher who did not want to teach, and I don't blame him. I remember questioning him about this once. I was like, it seems like we watch a lot of movies in this class. And he's like, have you looked at who else is in this class? And that was the most weirdly honest thing I'd ever heard a teacher say. It wasn't a
little depressing, but
well, it wasn't a class with the greatest students in it. Let's put it
or people who were committed or trying in any way.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so I don't blame him for like wanting. He could knock out a full week of class by showing the 6 hours of Around the World in 80 Days. But yeah, that's where we watched it, and then I think we just started it over when we finished it.
Oh, wow.
I think we watched it twice through. Yeah.
Wow.
Ridiculous. Your beloved Anne of Green Gables.
I love Anne of Green Gables so
Megan
much.
Follows.
Yes.
And who else was in that? Richard Farnsworth.
Oh, and Colleen Dewhurst.
Yeah.
The wonderful Colleen. I
mean, that was Canadian, though, right?
It was Canadian, but I think it deserves mention just because, especially among maybe people or women my age, it's very beloved in certain circles, and I loved that. That was, for me, I would see that on PBS. That would come on drive times during PBS, and you would see it on, and you would just be like, oh, this is what I'm doing now for the whole weekend. At least that would be me, because you caught it, it was there, and you were watching it. You were going to sit there and watch it. So I loved Anne of Green Gables. I still do. I'll still watch it. It's great.
And as much as you loved Anne of Green Gables, so did I love the title that I've saved for the end of the episode here.
I knew
because
it.
Man, did I love this thing.
You did.
Yeah.
You still do.
Still do. I could recite it.
Yeah.
And it's like 10 hours long. So that tells you how much I love it. Like I know all the dialogue. I know it scene by scene. I taped both V, the original miniseries, and V, the final battle, which came out a year later. Two separate miniseries. It launched a television series, which was not very good, unfortunately, although I thought it was awesome when I was a kid.
Right.
But I will stand behind the original miniseries, especially, but even the sequel one, which I think is super fun. Mm-hmm. For those of you that don't know V, they remade it some years ago.
Yeah, into
they rebooted
TV
it. It wasn't
show.
any good, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's essentially a Nazi Germany kind of Holocaust parable. About,
not overtly, but yeah.
Not overtly, but it's that's what it's based on.
Yes, that's what it's based on.
Yeah, about an alien species that comes to Earth and tries to ingratiate itself and essentially trick us while they are stealing our water and then eventually stealing our people, which they are going to use as food. And the small group of rebels, freedom fighters, who try to take them down. And it's super fun and very cinematic and incredibly well written. Has a great cast, and I think holds up to this day. And if you haven't
really
seen
great.
it, you are only committing a crime against yourself. You should see it.
It's so great. I have such a funny history with this because I remember when it came out, I was very young. I think I was maybe about 4, maybe 5, or something around that age. And it terrified me, like mainly because I would see like the commercials for it or like the very beginning of it. And it was whatever they did to promote it was very sort of scary and compelling, and I was so scared of it. I didn't know what it was, but it seemed really scary to me, so I wouldn't go anywhere near it. But I'm so glad to have seen it as an adult now because it really is so great. I love it now. If I had been like 10 years older than I was at the time, I would have loved it. But at 5, I couldn't handle it. But it's really great now. I love it. So good.
Yeah, it's cool. I love it. And I think just reflecting on TV movies in general, we sort of, in the middle of the episode, we deviated for a moment and talked about whether we could consider them kind of events or what kind of event status they had or to the degree to which you'd look forward to them. And I will say the thing I love about them is, there were only so many movies coming out in the theaters. And so I think it's, like, I really look back on, even though a lot of TV movies were not very good, and most of them were pretty disposable. The ones we mentioned in this show are probably like the cream of the crop, or at least the ones we remember well. And most TV movies I don't remember.
Yeah.
And yet I'm really glad to have grown up in the era where they were prominent, because they did give, it was like bonus movies. It was like something else to get a little excited about.
Yeah.
And granted, you'd like never heard of it until like a week before it aired, usually, because that's when they would start running commercials and where you would see the print ad in TV Guide. But it was just, it was fun to have something on a weekly basis to kind of get psyched about.
Yeah. That feeling of appointment viewing again for me, like being like, oh, I really want to be there for this. And maybe it was just the promotion departments did a really good job of like drawing you in. I remember the commercial seeming either really scary because I was too young, or compelling, like, ooh, I want to watch that. And then, like we were saying, the graphic and the intro music that would come before these things really set you up for like, I'm going to watch something now. It was sort of event thing. So I remember it that way too. I remember feeling excited for some of these things. Yeah. Or if it was one of those things like, Dance Till Dawn, where it had a bunch of my favorite actors in it, I'd be like, oh my God, that's so cool. I can't wait to see, Alyssa Milano in this thing, or whatever. So yeah.
I guess what we're trying to say is 80s TV movies. Give them a chance.
Give them a chance. Or, have some fond memories if you remember them, and enjoy a little nostalgia with us as you consider your own favorites if you have them from the past.
I would say, let me think. In summary, I would say if you like fun, dumb comedies, Double Switch, the Disney Sunday Night movie.
It's so great. It's really sweet, too. It's so fun.
If you love horror films or ghost stories, Dark Night of the Scarecrow, you can't go wrong with that. If you like camp, I would say look up Amazons. Thrillers, I would say Final Jeopardy is worth a watch. If you want to really look at how ridiculous the 80s could be, Mazes and Monsters is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
If you love Michael J. Fox, his stardom is on full display in those early teen movies. They're actually really fun to watch because of him. Poison Ivy, especially, that's the one set at summer camp. And you can't go wrong with V.
Nope.
And In Broad Daylight, as I said, is I think one of the better films of the decade, even though it was premiered on television. So.
Well, and some
recommendations for you. And Lisa, do you want to throw a couple in too?
I think I only really have one. I just once again want to say, if you are like me and you like a gentle literary, period piece.
Ewok Adventure,
absolutely. No, Anne of Green Gables. I mean, do yourself a favor if you haven't seen it and you like what I just described, that sort of gentle period, lovely, but also somewhat literary experience. It's so great. I love that movie or miniseries so much.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for hanging with us, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next time.
You've been listening to The Long Rewind. The program is produced by Dustin Morrow and hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli. If you enjoy the show, please consider hitting the subscribe button, leave us a good review on your podcast app, and tell your friends about the program. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.